What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Left Fresh podcast. Thank you all for tapping in. Normally it's the Wednesday, but of course, we all know the momentous occasion that happened yesterday. It was game one of the NBA Finals. But before we get into that, hope you all had a great week. Like I said, usually the hump day episode, but it turned into the Thursday episode due to the NBA Finals. Hope you all had a great weekend before that, and just get you ready for Friday. Looking forward to the weekend and everything as well. If you're just jumping on for the first time, just want to encourage you to subscribe, like, comment, share, tell a friend, tell a friend. If those who are already on the regulars, I appreciate you for jumping on as usual. Yeah, let's not waste any delay. Let's not delay any further. Let's get to it. You know what I mean? Be a Knicks fan, nothing less to say. Game one, big win, very very impressive win as well. Shout out to San Antonio, young team. Fought through the grind of their first NBA playoffs together and made a big run all the way to getting here. They played impressive all the way to the end. Um, Good young core, developing. Played hard all the way to the end. Just went against a more experienced Knicks team in game one. Coming off game seven, a 7 game series, going against a Knicks team that's had a lot of rest from sweeping 2 rounds. And it all came together, looked great, for the optics and everything like that. I think everybody left, satisfied, even though it finished as a 10-point win. It was pretty close, relatively close throughout the course of the game. It was kind of back and forth. Spurs went on runs, Knicks went on runs, and everything like that. I enjoyed the game personally to watch from the optics of it, and like how my team came out. I like the effort and everything. Uh, yeah, the people I've had talks with about the series, a lot of people thought that this was like, oh, anybody that come out of the West can beat the Knicks, it's the East, and everything. And I'm not one to deny that a lot of times the best team to come out of and win a championship usually comes out of the West, or a lot of the dominant teams over the past years when we had dynasties. You know, you've seen usually come out of the West. From Golden State, Kobe's Lakers, Spurs. The last couple of dynasties we all seen came out of the West. And it hasn't been an Eastern Conference dynasty since Jordan's Bulls. So I mean, I fully understand. And Miami Heat with Braun and Wade, that was just 2 rings. You know what I mean? Like it's been a while. We haven't seen really a full fledged dynasty in the East. So I understand the skepticism when it comes to like finals matchups. Even if it's my team, I understand the realism of, typically the Western Conference team is usually going to be the favorite. But when I see this particular matchup, I didn't really see anything that really scared me about, the Spurs. I know they're a great team. I know they're young and athletic. They play defense, but this is also a team that many felt was a year away, and that experience would get to them at some point. And when we got to this point now, it's like, oh yeah, when we got to the preview of the finals, everybody's just decisively going with the Spurs. I'm like, oh, we're going with the most inexperienced team now. Okay. But I mean, I understand because Wimby's out, Wimby's on that team and he's, they're ahead of the curve. But why wouldn't experience play a factor in this series if everyone has speculation up to this point? But I mean, in fairness, the Spurs did make it to this point, made it past, experience, lack of experience still got them this far. But I think a lot of experience was shown in this Knicks team. Just the grind of a series, grind through a game. This is the second straight series where the Knicks had to climb back from being down at double digits at some point. You know what I mean? Yeah, Big. What's up, man? Welcome, 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 Big. Welcome. Hey, grab a seat, Big. Yeah, yeah. Hey, you just jumped on when I was giving the Spurs nothing but props before you jumped on, man. You know what I mean? They're definitely a worthy finals opponent. And I don't want to lose sight of that. And I definitely don't want to get too high on myself as a Knicks fan. This is only game one. I'll keep the level head about this from right now. This is only game one. I was 9 when John Starks went ice cold in game 7 and we lost a 3-2 lead to the Rockets. So I'm not, putting too much stock into it. I'm only just going off what happened in this game. Looking forward to the series. I can't really honestly tell you how San Antonio is going to respond or how the Knicks are going to adjust to San Antonio's response. But yeah, I mean, it's a yeah. If the Knicks get the first two at home, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Game two is a must win for the Spurs. There's no coming back from that. This is you came in right on the experience part I was talking about. Bing, it's like I don't know if they can really overcome a 2-0 deficit, even as good as this team is, as much as they are ahead of the curve. I'm not sure if they have that type of grit and tenacity to overcome a 2-0 deficit. Even with De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes as veteran leadership on that team, you know, I don't think that I think that's too much to overcome with this particular Knicks team, with how the Knicks are playing at this point. You know what I mean? It's like it's it's not the same Knicks team that we saw in round one. It's not the same Knicks team that we saw when it was coached by Tom Thibodeau. Mike Brown made the tweaks necessary to get the most out of this talent, to optimize the amount of talent that they have on this team. Yeah, yeah. As much as they struggle, OKC, they can't climb out of a 2-0 hole and get two in the garden. Yeah, yeah. And it's like, there's certain things that I saw just from game one that I can see being an issue throughout the entire series. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. And it's like it's not just overreaction off of one game. These are like red flags that I'm seeing that I saw throughout the course of the game. And it's like, if this continues, yeah, the Knicks got this series. You know what I mean? I'm not just discounting, how they can adjust for game two. Wimby can go off for 40 and 24 rebounds the next game. That's kind of how he's been throughout the course of the playoffs. He's had some historical nights and he's had some pretty off nights. And that's what kind of made me question, why is everybody so sold on the Spurs at the beginning of the series? Like the Spurs are, of course, they're a great defensive team. You got the defensive player of the year, you got great defensive guards. The guys are young, they get out on the floor, they're athletic. And when their shots are hitting, that's when they're pretty much unstoppable. But the consistency of their shots is they're not consistent enough of a shooting team. And Wimby, as the best player on the team and possibly in the league, you know what I'm saying? I'm still standing on the fact that I wouldn't start a team with anybody else other than Wimby. But at the same time, Wimby's also 22 years old and he's still defining his game. And you still see it, even though he can do almost anything on the court at that height. It's a matter of when to do it, what to do it, and how well he excels at it. And one of the things that kind of stuck out was kind of like that mid-range shooting, kind of that touch around the basket. You know what I mean? Like when you look at the Spurs box score, right? You see Wimby, he had 26 points, he had 12 boards, he had 3 blocks. Now he also had 6 turnovers, which is also part of the inefficiency I'm gonna get into as well. That on those looking at traditional stats, it looked like he did everything he could on his end, right? He had 26, 20, 26, 12. I mean, honestly, that's a light night for Wimby, considering he's had 30 point, 15 rebound games in less time. You know what I mean? And then when you look at the efficiency, and this is where you got to give props to Karl Anthony Towns, because Wimby shot 6 for 21, 2 of 9 from the field. And watching the game, you can see how physical Karl Anthony Towns played him and how he kind of limited Wimby from really doing too much. You can also see Wimby trying to do too much to create. Like he has to find a simpler offense for him. I mean, it's nice that you can do all the dribble moves and the hezzy and the drop and the step backs and everything. But at 7'5", you got to have a running hook. You know what I mean? Like you can't be able to shoot from anywhere on the floor, but you still need work on your running hook, or you still need that turnaround jumper just doesn't have the same touch. And you work with Olajuwon and Garnett in the offseason. So that's probably the next step to work with them on, is getting that type of shot that they had, that type of mid-range game that they had. Yeah, the second man up is Dylan Harper, which is a knock on their coaching, because they have Dylan Harper sitting at like a critical stretch in the game, and he was cooking in the first quarter. And they decided to go back to De'Aaron Fox, who you can see had 3 of 13 shooting, 0 for 4 from 3. He was shooting bricks all night last night. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like a lineup. You kind of sat your hot hand, Dylan Harper, and I get he's a rookie. He could have came out there and went flat too. And that's kind of to the point about inexperience. Is like, you don't have anybody really on the Spurs that's consistent offensively enough to keep up with the Knicks. If you're not getting the stops on the Knicks either, that's another problem. You know what I mean? Like the Spurs' big thing was defense, and the Knicks pretty much they had a little bit of rust getting it, just like against the Cavs in game one in the Eastern Conference Finals, they had a little bit of rust, and they got that once they shook that rust off, it was like, yeah, it was tough. I mean, look at Jalen Brunson. He started off rough, got hurt a little bit, and he just came out in the fourth quarter and he just lit it up. Yeah, they don't have a number two. Not a one that you can consistently rely on just yet. And this is kind of the point of Dylan Harper next year should be all the number two they need. But as a rookie, you're expecting a lot from a really young team, and I think people overlook that when people were projecting that the Spurs will win this series is that they're still inexperienced. Just because inexperience hasn't gotten to them up to this point, which is still very far. That's how far ahead of the curve they are, and that's how scary they're going to be next year. It was Harper last night, then it might be Fox, and it might be. You're right. And between that much players on the team, there should be a little bit more consistent contribution from somebody. Somebody got to step up because there's no guarantee that the next guy is going to be as consistent. Just a young team. I mean, you look at the Knicks. Josh Hart was like the unsung hero in this one. I mean, only 3 points, but 15 rebounds. He was all over the boards. I mean, 6'5", and that's another thing on Wemby. Wemby had double-digit rebounds, but I mean, Josh Hart had 15 boards. Karl Anthony Towns had 12 boards. The Knicks beat the Spurs on the boards. And a lot of that had to do with Karl Anthony Towns pulling Wemby away from the basket with being such the shooter that Karl Anthony Towns is. Just the threat of him being a three-point shooter, which is kind of puzzling because Chet's a three-point threat, and they didn't have Wemby guarding Chet in the OKC series as much because they didn't want to pull Wemby away from the basket. They had somebody else guard Chet, and Wemby would just guard like Hartenstein or the least best shooter. A lot of people were surprised that they didn't challenge Josh Hart to shoot by putting Wemby on him, and yeah, that shouldn't happen. Knicks shouldn't beat them on the boards. Yeah, I mean, especially with Josh Hart, he's an undersized, like he's a guard basically playing out of position basically, but his rebounding IQ, 6 assists, 4 steals. I mean, he had a hell of an all around good game. That was like he stuck out. He stuck out when I was watching him. And then Karl Anthony Towns. If Karl Anthony Towns continues to play like this, the Knicks can win a chip. On both sides of the ball, Karl Anthony Towns, he was aggressive. He was going at Wemby. Um, yeah, I was definitely impressed with Karl Anthony Towns. He shot pretty efficiently, not quite 50%, but 46% against Wemby isn't bad at all. Um, the rest of the Knicks, it was a little bit of rust. You know what I mean? It was a little bit of rust. I could see like the shooting percentages wasn't great for everybody. Some of them was off. And of course, you on the road. Role players don't really give you that much. So still in the game, against the Spurs was big. Again, the Spurs don't have a second big man. Yeah, I mean, Cornette is not enough because, Mitchell Robinson playing, we just match up with them better than I would say even OKC did because Chet Holmgren is literally the same size as Wemby, and shorter and skinny, just as skinny. Karl Anthony Towns don't have, isn't 7'4", but he's 7 feet, and he's got 270 pounds to move around. Like that can physically. You started seeing it wear on Wemby a little bit. I mean, they got through Minnesota because Minnesota didn't have the depth, but Minnesota had the bigs to fatigue and wear down on Wemby as well. Like, and then that was 2 rounds ago. You're in the finals at this point. Wemby has never went this far and, had his body pushed to the limits like this. I mean, like I said, it's not to excuse what he is. I'm just not surprised if the Spurs don't win this series. I wasn't high on the Spurs winning the series. I gave them the possibility, but I gave my Knicks a chance too, not because of fandom, but out of objectivity too. Like, hey, the Knicks have been beating teams consistently and by a wide margin all the way up to this point. I mean, it wasn't just squeaking out of the East; they dominated the East. I mean, they were like a Western Conference team that was in the East. And I guess at the end of the day, the best player is going against a great team, and his team is pretty good. So I understand the speculation the skepticism about the Knicks beating them, but I think the Knicks are just is firing on all cylinders right now. They're just playing inspired basketball, and you know they figured out they made the tweaks that was like I said, Mike Brown made the tweaks that Tom Thibodeau didn't. Number one thing he did was take the ball out of Jalen Brunson's hands as much, so that Jalen Brunson isn't so worn out and fatigued in the fourth. That way he could take over the fourth quarter like he's supposed to. And he's getting the most out of the unsung hero, the guy that everybody made a trade that the Knicks made a trade for, and it was to get Karl Anthony Towns. And I think the struggle up to this point was getting Karl Anthony Towns consistent production and consistently involved in the offense to where he's not like just a designated spot up shooter. Now, Karl Anthony Towns, 18 points, 12 boards, 4 assists. Usually he gets about 6 or 7. He's had triple doubles on his playoff run. That's, I mean, I'm not going to say, dare I say, joking or anything like that, but you're getting, you know, you're getting a lot out of Towns right now. I mean, and the playmaking is actually making it look better. I mean, this is the same Towns that Minnesota paid super max salary to and gave up on. Y'all treat Tibbs like Mark Jackson. They go this thing, yeah, yeah, yeah. Listen. I love what Mark Jackson did, bring the Golden State around. But listen, Draymond Green was not starting when Mark Jackson was coaching. Iguodala was still starting, wasn't moved to the bench. I mean, it was those type of tweaks. Steph Curry was, he was still trying to. Mark Jackson was still trying to make Steph like a floor general, traditional point guard. Steve Kerr was like, "Hey, fire it away," and look what we got. So I mean, the reality is, I mean, and then think about it, Mike Brown. One thing I said about this series is that there's going to be a lot of narrative that's going to come from this championship. I mean, first off, this is box office. Big star like Wemby and a big mark playing against a big market like the Knicks. Game 3 in New York is going to be through the roof, especially now that the Knicks still have a fighting chance by the time this gets back to the Garden. It's a big difference if the Knicks went into the Garden down 2-0, but if the Knicks already coming back at least tied up, like this, the Garden's going to be through the roof. It's going to be ridiculous. And one of the things I was talking, I just see a lot of discourse around, a lot of discussion around is like, what does this do for all these different players involved in this series? Yeah, ticket prices off the chain. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was hard enough to get a Knicks game when the Knicks were terrible. Knicks in the finals. I mean, yeah, you can hang up those tickets. MSG is going to be through the roof. Yeah, and one of the things that at the outcome of this series has so much discussion about, you know, these narratives is going to be about what happens if the Knicks win a ring. I mean, this will be the first ring that the Knicks had in what 50 or over 50 years. So I mean, I can understand like there's going to be a lot of overreaction. There's going to be a lot of overreaction, but particularly, there's a lot of question about what does this do for Jalen Brunson? How does Jalen Brunson's how will this affect Jalen Brunson's legacy? Because for one, you win a ring in New York. I mean, you can pretty much pick out where you want to put your statue. Okay, you win a ring in New York. You bring a ring to the New York Knicks. You can pretty much pick out where you want your statue put. Okay, you can put it on top of the Empire State Building. I mean, they're gonna put it there. You know what I mean? First off, the city's gonna go through the roof, and yeah, Jalen Brunson is gonna be heroed because he's already being heroed. I mean, and one of the biggest narrative questions I keep seeing is, will he be the greatest Nick ever? Will he ever be the greatest New York Nick ever? And I want to say, I can understand like, oh my God, the hype from 50 years and not winning the ring will probably put him over the top. But in context, I'm not sure yet, just yet. You know what I mean? I'm not sure just yet because as you see his career, he's had a great career in New York. It's been 4 years. Um, but I just, yeah, that's what I mean. We got to kind of separate the praise from the glaze. You know what I mean? You got to separate the praise from the glaze. 4 years, had a hell of a 4 years though. 29 points a game, 6 assists as a Nick. He's been on a few All NBA teams, not quite first teams, but other than in a 3-time All Star, I don't know if that's enough resume, even with a ring in a Finals MVP. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure if that's enough to even put him over Pat, who never won a ring. Of course, that's kind of the hanging indictment, but Pat had a great overall career individually as a Knick, and you know he went to one finals, ran into Elijah Wan, ran into Jordan. I mean, and even then, if one ring puts Jalen Brunson over Pat Ewing? How come 2 rings from Willis Reed or Clyde Frazier didn't put them over Pat? How come Patrick Ewing is still widely regarded as the greatest Knick? You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree. How can Jalen Brunson be the greatest Knick ever with 1 ring when there's players with 2 rings? Willis Reed had 2 rings, and we never put him over Pat. And the reason why I say that is because, yeah, Walt Frazier too. They was on the same team, exactly. And it's kind of the same dynamic. I feel like that '70s Knicks team is being reincarnated with this 2026 Knicks team. You think about the parts in place is very similar. I don't know if there's an Earl to Pearl Monroe on this Knicks team, but between Bridges and OG. But yeah, because like I said, Jalen Brunson's had an impressive career as a Knick. Since he's been here, he's been a pleasant surprise too. I wasn't the highest on him. I'll be the first to admit it. And I remember there was a time where we were discussing getting either Jalen Brunson or Donovan Mitchell, or even entertaining the idea of trying to get both. And I'm like, what are we doing here? We can't have a miniature backcourt here. The 2 defensive liabilities is not going to work. And even when the Knicks haven't been looking good, and I've been ragging on them, I'll be the first to admit as a Knicks fan, yeah, I was rough on them Knicks. You know what I mean? Down 2-1 to the Hawks, you know, underachieving in the regular season, getting flattened by all the good teams. We look like the same team from last year and everything like that. This is what Jalen Brunson was still producing. We look like the same stagnant, flat team that just looked like we just make the playoffs and just happy to be here and then go home. You know what I mean? That's what team we look like up until Mike Brown made the tweaks that he did. And part of the tweaks that he did is, like I said earlier, gotten the most out of Karl Anthony Towns. Now, Karl Anthony Towns has been another player that's been kind of cast off by the team that drafted him, believed in him, made him, number 1 pick, made him the cornerstone of their franchise. And then, the Minnesota Timberwolves, being the Timberwolves that they were, have been relatively bad, even with Karl Anthony Towns producing. Karl Anthony Towns has even won all NBAs as a Minnesota Timberwolf. Yeah, he's been all NBA in 2018, all NBA in 2022. So, a lot of cat slander, a lot of it warranted, a lot of, harmless humor. But Cat has been productive. You cannot deny the productivity. You cannot deny the results, even if you felt like that's just the iceberg of the potential. If you look at these numbers, 24, 25 points a game, 10 boards. Underrated passer, even in Minnesota. He still almost averaged about 4 or 5 assists. Sometimes he might have been a little too passive, a little too much of a playmaker. Sometimes became a little too much of a spot up shooter. But Cat was, you know, highly heralded coming out of college, had a lot of skill, still one of the best shooting big men. Getting the most out of him has kind of made him and Jalen Brunson more so of a duo than Jalen Brunson, you know, being the little guy carrying the team. That narrative, that Allen Iverson narrative, you know, all the point guards. Nah, Cat was when they were rebuilding. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Cat was really trying to carry Minnesota Timberwolves team. And as soon as he got Ant, I guess Ant became more the alpha dog, and Cat kind of relegated to the second role that year. They went to the conference finals, and you know, yeah, Julius Randle, kind of wish him the best, but him and RJ Barrett, they had some bad playoff runs when they were kind of just really bad consistent as far as shooting. I did miss the dog and the motor that he had, but yeah, Cat to be a much better shooter, more skilled. I mean, and getting this type of production out of Cat right here is kind of the difference maker. It's kind of a difference maker because at one point it was a lateral thing. I get what you're saying because Cat would kind of shy away from the moment or not just be involved in the moment, and then you kind of think you might as well have Randall just, and then Randall would just kind of be overly aggressive, kind of fire off a lot of bad shots, kind of chuck a lot of shots. But yeah, Cat. Now that we're getting this type of player out of Cat, he's become the perfect either complement to Jalen Brunson or the duo member to Jalen Brunson because we haven't been winning like this when Jalen Brunson was playing ISO ball. He had some clutch heroics and everything like that. He carried the Knicks as far as he could, but he's not carrying the Knicks like this anymore. The Knicks are actually, I mean, he's the best player on the Knicks as far as, the reliable scorer and the closer, but the supporting cast around him is a lot better. is a lot better. And there's been nights where he hasn't been on, and the Knicks cast still picked it up. And like I said, Cat playing the way he's playing in game one can actually Knicks can actually win this series getting that type of production out of him. Um, yeah, it's kind of ironic to see that from Cat, but I mean, Cat's had some moments in the playoffs. I mean, there's not enough, for people to not have a narrative about him, but he played pretty well against Jokic in the second round. Was it 2 years ago when he was in Minnesota and him and Ant Man and they made it past Denver in 7 games? He actually played pretty well against Jokic. Defense too. This is why I'm not really surprised that he actually played pretty good defense on Wimby because he was playing pretty good defense on Jokic when Rudy Gobert wasn't playing the best defense on him. So I mean, yeah, I mean, Cat's had his moments and looked like at the shining moment, at the biggest moment when you kind of need him the most. I mean, he's stepped up so far. So far so good. Like I said, I'm not gonna go overboard with it, but yeah, I mean, as I said, it's just game one. Um, not trying to overreact to it just yet, but yeah, it's definitely looking good for my Knicks right now. And like I said, it's gonna be a lot of narratives gonna be out here. It's gonna be um, a lot of Jalen Brunson glaze a little bit, but at the same time, I don't think that we need to get ahead of ourselves a little bit. You know what I mean? Because I do think that this Knicks team has become more of a perfect storm, more so than Jalen Brunson willing a team to a ring. But yeah, that's what it does. That's how I feel about the narrative surrounding the Knicks. Now, I'm not going to rule out the idea. Like I said, I'm not counting out the Spurs. I'm not counting out the Spurs after just one game. But yeah, so I'm not counting them out after one game. But if Wimby does manage to pick it up, bring it together, and lead the Spurs to a ring in just year three, that's a discussion. This is, that's going to be worthy of praise. If he loses this, yeah, the criticism is going to be warranted because if he loses, the criticism is going to be warranted because he's 22 years old and he got more to work on. You know what I mean? That'll be just the story. They're saying there's still more to the evolution of your game. Look how far you got at this early in your career. You got a lot to look forward to. The criticism won't be too tough because look how far you got. But I mean, if he wins a finals and a ring and a finals MVP, a defensive player of the year, third place MVP voting in the same year, the same third year, I mean, that's incredibly ahead of the curve. Almost too good to be true, which is another reason why I won't be surprised if they lose this series. I mean, it comes with everybody. Every story has a shortcoming to it. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't come out like this way unless you're Magic Johnson, who already had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or you're Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Lou Alcindor, shall I say, respectfully, back then when you had Oscar Robertson. Somewhere along the line, you had at least some sort of Hall of Fame caliber player, a veteran around you. So Victor leading a team with just veteran role players, or maybe De'Aaron Fox would count as a veteran. But I mean, that would say a lot for his legacy. Like I said, this can only help him if he wins. If he lose, you know, it wouldn't be that he would probably still come into the NBA next season. Like most of them still probably have him as the best player in the league. Just off of defense alone with the scoring that he does have. Like I said, he got some tools to work on in the offensive department. He got some repertoire tools to sharpen up, but he's still a productive scorer who rebounds and blocks shots. I mean, he's still very, in his best overall. He's still pretty efficient. Like I said, this doesn't. I don't think the outcome of this series determines much of anything coming into next season. He's still going to be one of the best players in the league, probably the best player. And like I said, I won't brush any GOAT debates though. I mean, not well the one ring. No. Mm-mm. See that there's an in between point where it's like, if he wins, he's gonna get all the praise. He's on that GOAT trajectory. We're not putting him in any GOAT debates, but he's on a trajectory. How the rest of his career plays out still plays a factor into it. No matter how early he gets a ring, there's still a whole career to be considered. But trajectory is through the roof. So, I mean, yeah, Victor Wemby's had an incredible season. Bounced back from a injury shortened first season. Like I said, you look at the numbers. He's led the league in blocks 3 years in a row by astronomical proportion. I mean, almost 3.5 per game the last 2 years before this. I mean, three a game. You know, that's hard to get a lot that type of numbers in this type of pace and space to get those type of shot blocking numbers. And Wimby, that just shows how much of an effect he is on defense. But yeah, Wimby, he has a good chance to like I said, do something ahead of his time, ahead of his curve, his development curve. And you know, if he comes up short, it's almost like tradition. It's almost like you have to pretty much come up short in order to go through the steps in the process. Like the NBA is a baby step league. I keep saying that, I keep reiterating that because you know the NBA is about, you know, you're not getting ahead of these veterans and these players who have been in the league for years, working up to this point. And this Knicks team is kind of like a perfect storm. Like I said, um, you don't know how many more years the Knicks have in a window to win. They can't waste this opportunity because you definitely don't want another shot at San Antonio next year. Next year, they're going to be pretty much unstoppable at that point. You know what I mean? They're going to evolve, get better, and everything like that. So it's best to beat them now and then send them to the offseason angry when they come back and beat you, because if they beat you now, there ain't no guarantee you're going to come back and beat them the next year. It's probably going to get less likely to beat them next year and be the Knicks. That's if you even get back there. Like I said, this is a perfect storm. And another reason why I say, you know, we can't just be too quick to give Jalen Brunson all of the credit, because Jalen Brunson gets a lot of credit alone for taking a pay cut. He took a team-friendly contract to bring in the type of help that the Knicks have, which lets you know right there that he's not really just dragging a team to the finals. He's, as a little guy, he's a very important part, the most important part of a team as a little guy. But yeah, when you look at this roster in hindsight, when you look at this Knicks team in hindsight, you're gonna be like, damn, this was a pretty good Knicks roster right here. Balance, deep, you know, the typical championship formula. And, you know, the apologies have to go to GM Leon Rose because he did a lot to put this team together and got a lot of criticism when it wasn't getting his results. It's gonna pay off big time if they get the ring. So Leon Rose, salute to you up to this point, man. But we had, like I said, everybody just jumped on. You know, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button, like, comment, share, tell a friend. This is the Thursday edition of the Left Fresh podcast. Wednesday was the NBA Finals. Was not competing with that. Here talking sports. You know, great game one. Like I said, you can find me on Instagram at This Is Left Fresh. You can find me on TikTok at This Is Left Fresh. We're gonna switch gears now. Going to the NFL. Had some blockbuster trades that happened. Um, no bigger than the one that, you know, kind of felt like these two trades was bound to happen at some point, but it was going to be a blockbuster when it does. And the first one, no less, is Myles Garrett, one of the all-time great edge rushers, one of the great pass rushers ever, still in his prime. Traded to the Los Angeles Rams from the Cleveland Browns for edge rusher Jared Verse, another uprising young edge rusher who's pretty much on a great trajectory himself. Worked a lot with Aaron Donald, had some intense offseason workouts, had a great season, great 2 seasons in the league, very young. I feel like that was a great part to put in a trade package to get Myles Garrett, along with a 2027 first round pick, a 2028 second round pick, and a 2029 third round pick. Um, I think this trade is about as even as it gets, especially if Jared Verse develops the way he does. And if Cleveland hits on those picks, I see this being similar to the Matt Stafford, Jared Goff trade, where, you know, Detroit got a haul of draft picks and basically rebuilt the team that they have now off of that. Detroit was one of the worst teams in the NFL, made the trade, built through the draft, and became one of the best teams in the NFL. Even though they had an off year this season, they pretty much made a window for themselves to compete using the picks that they got from trading Matt Stafford for Jared Goff. Cleveland, another team that's been historically bad, has a chance to do the same thing. Yeah, he's got a better chance of getting a ring with the Rams and the Browns anyway. So, oh yeah. It's been a free Myles Garrett party. Myles Garrett out free. It's been a free Myles Garrett party for him. everybody should be happy for Myles Garrett at this point. I mean, this guy broke the NFL sack record on a team that wasn't going anywhere, that was putrid offensively. Um, no shade to Shador, but he came in late in the season, and the season was pretty much a loss. Um, he doesn't have to come back to that, debacle of what quarterback is going to start in Cleveland, and hoping the offense gets it together. Now he can be a key part on a team that was already competing for a Super Bowl, just a game away. Um, does this put them in a position to compete with Seattle? Absolutely. All right, you got a game record at this point. You got a veteran team. You added Trent McDuffie earlier this offseason, one of the best corners in football. And now you got the best edge rusher in since Aaron Donald. I mean, you almost want to ask Aaron Donald to come out of retirement for one more year because of this. I mean, this is too enticing to pass up. But yeah, I mean, Myles Garrett, this was a big move this is a real big move for the Rams. And like I said, the Rams after trading for Matt Stafford. People don't remember the free agent signings that the Rams made when they made the Super Bowl appearance in 2018 to go against the Patriots, and where they lost 10-3. But Patriots, I mean, the Rams, since they've been in LA, the Rams have no problem, you know, trading away those picks and getting guys that are in win now. Okay. One thing about the Rams, they are in win now mode. That is LA sports right there. That's big market sports right there. That is indicative of big market sports. You know, building through the draft is cute and it's cool. It's okay when you're a small market team. That's pretty much the only way, because big time free agents aren't just using their unrestricted free agency to come sign with you in your market. You know what I mean? You got to make Hollywood moves. You got to put butts in the seats when you become a contender. You know what I mean? You can't just build a nice little humble team full of stars. You got to get some household names. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what they got. It's just like I said, you got the Dodgers, they got to get Otani. Lakers, they got to get LeBron. Rams, what you gonna do, man? You gonna build through the draft humbly and everything? Nah, you gotta make a big swing, and that's what they did. That's typical LA thing. Sometimes as a fan of a New York teams, fan of a Yankees and everything like that. You respect teams that go out and get the best players and try to put them all together. But you look at Myles Garrett and his Browns career: 125 sacks, franchise leader; 23 multi-sack games, franchise leader; all-time single season sack leader record in 2025 last year; second most sacks in first 9 career seasons since 1982; 5-time first team All-Pro; 2-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year. That's who the Rams are getting pretty much at the peak of his career. You really want him to stay healthy to, really make a contribution for the Rams, even though I don't, I want my team to beat them. But this is a big time move for the Rams. If you're a Rams fan, you got to be ecstatic. You should be ecstatic. Like I said, that resume through the roof. You look at the numbers. Um, he's only had one season we recorded less than 10 sacks, and that was his rookie season. I mean, in his worst season, he had 10 sacks. I mean, this is a game record. And on a defense that the Rams was pretty good, but the secondary wasn't the best. That's why they got Trent McDuffie. And then you get the pass rush even better than what it is, put even more pressure. The Rams, when they drafted Ty Simpson, a lot of people questioned what they were doing. This is the plan. This is win now. Ty Simpson's just on stash until Matt Stafford is gone. Um, you know, One thing about the Rams, they will mortgage a future for it. I mean, and typically it works. Like I said, they had a Super Bowl appearance in 2018. They won the whole thing in 2021. Typically it works when they cash in they usually cash in like this. Remember in 2021 they made the big trade for Jalen Ramsey as well. That was another big trade they made, and it paid dividends for him as well for the time that they had him. But yeah, Myles Garrett, I mean, this is a home run swing. Rams been going at this, I've heard, since March. You know, a lot of teams try to make an offer for Myles Garrett. The Philadelphia Eagles made an offer for Myles Garrett, but reportedly the Rams didn't, I mean, the Browns didn't want anything from the Eagles that wasn't Jalen Carter. So there goes that for the Eagles as a rival. Couldn't be happier. Great choice. You didn't trade him to the Eagles. Speaking of the Eagles, they finally got rid of their talented yet I'm going to say troublesome wide receiver AJ Brown. A lot of controversy throughout the regular season with him. A lot of you know reported turmoil, reported this, reported that. AJ Brown went publicly and actually said that he actually was the root of some of those leaks too, just to keep the team. I don't know, but he's gone. And I think at a certain point, Eagles fans were kind of relieved that he are kind of relieved that he is. When you don't win a Super Bowl, everything is amplified. Once you don't win, when he won the Super Bowl, nobody paid attention to him reading the book on the sidelines. We won the Super Bowl. That's how you want to celebrate, celebrate. But when the problems leaked throughout the regular season and the Eagles were struggling to get their offense together, that's when those little issues become glaring issues. It's kind of like when there's smoke, there's fire. And, at the beginning of it, it's like, oh, yeah, it's just a little, he'll be all right. It's too much talent on his team. We'll still, you know, the Eagles look like a dynasty when they won a ring and came back next season and looked like first wild card weekend exit. A team that sputtered all through the offense. To me, it's a big. It's not a big deal because I feel like AJ Brown was going to be gone at some point. You know what I mean? And he didn't necessarily go Antonio Brown, but he accelerated it with his own doing. But I don't think the Eagles were going to be able to pay him or keep him and whoever else they wanted to keep. So this kind of made sense for them. This was kind of almost felt like inevitable anyway, despite the minor dramas and everything. But AJ Brown, nevertheless, is a very talented wide receiver. He's a great weapon when he's being fed the ball. He's going to go out there to New England with Drake May. A lot of people thinking, oh, he may bring the same baggage with him out there. He has a great relationship with Mike Vrabel, and Drake May is if he can find Stephon Diggs, he should have a great time finding AJ Brown. So I'm not going to just downplay him going to New England like, oh, it's not going to work out. But at the same time, I know and understand everybody's speculation, but I think this is a situation where he can actually, have a good run here towards the back end of his career. Because AJ Brown, he's becoming more of a veteran receiver at this point. I mean, he's 28. I mean, he's not quite 30, but I mean, you pretty much got a 2-year window of his best years left in him. I mean, he still can get some production out of him after 30, but just know that, everybody knows a receiver after 30. I mean, you can be an ageless wonder still and still get some yards, but you're not going to be prime anything after 30 at receiver. You can still be ageless. You can still be impactful, but you're not anything like your prime. So, I mean, this is, a quick move for New England to get them over the top. For the Eagles, this is just a quick way to just get rid of a player that you're going to get rid of anyway, and you got a first round out of it in 2028. You can't get mad at that. Howie Roseman, still a tight race between Howie Roseman is the best GM in football and Seattle's GM as well. So I mean, it's either way, but yeah, Howie's still one of the best there is as a GM, even as a rival. I have to admit that. But yeah, AJ Brown, you know, great weapon, great receiver. You notice his receiving yards the past 2 seasons are right at 1,000 yards. So it's like, a lot of people were defending, the offense being bad by saying, well, AJ Brown's still getting his 1,000 yards. Well, AJ Brown 2 years for the 2 years straight got 1,400 yards, and with the same quarterback. So yeah, I mean those numbers went down drastically. And I'm not one to say whether it is Jalen Hurts' fault because Jalen Hurts has had a lot of different coordinators in a little bit of time he's played in the NFL. I mean, the reports, and this is all speculation, that maybe he may be a little rigid when it comes to what type of style he wants to play, particularly getting under center. But I think it's a little more than just Jalen Hurts in either, all around. I think the whole offense. I think the offensive line. I think the offensive line wasn't that good. You know what I mean? The offensive line was almost one of the best offensive line. The offensive line Philadelphia had when they won the Super Bowl was probably one of the greatest offensive lines in NFL history. That line was one of the best offensive lines in NFL history. That Philadelphia Super Bowl winning offensive line was one of the best in history. Okay. Saquon wasn't even getting touched pretty much that season. Okay. He almost got like an effortless 2,000 yards. So, I mean, that's the problem right there. I think the offensive line has taken a step back. And I think Saquon, as a veteran running back, they have taken a step back. So there was different parts around Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown that were required to work for them to win, and it wasn't what it was 2 years ago. So it's interesting to see. And Kyle Lemon just got drafted to the Eagles as well. So I mean, I already knew AJ Brown was pretty much good as gone when they drafted Kyle Lemon. That was, I figured that was pretty much a done deal. But moving forward, can you get the offensive line back to where the running game is that explosive again? And then, now that Jalen Hurts does not have an AJ Brown, which one of those receivers can be that level of good? Like he's still got a good receiving core. He's still got some weapons out there, but you lost a big weapon. Even when you needed him, he was there. You can find AJ Brown. I don't know if you're going to be able to find the rest of the receivers the way you found AJ Brown. So, it's going to be interesting to find out. Like I said, these to me were two trades that were bound to happen. Myles Garrett, I thought wasn't going to happen once he signed the extension. I remember there was a whole, last year, the year before, there was a whole big talk about trading Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett going here, Myles Garrett going there, and he didn't end up anywhere. And I was like, well, he might just end out his career well paid, breaking records, and end his career as a Brown. But then, lo and behold, here come the Rams finally with the offer they couldn't refuse, and the deal got made. I think the Eagles, like I said, trading AJ Brown was inevitable. I felt like he was probably going to be one of the first players they traded just to shed salary. Anyway, being at his position, see how they drafted Kyle Lemon out of USC, the wide receiver, first round. Just that quick, I already knew the writing was on the wall then. And I mean, that was pretty much the excitement of the NFL offseason this past week. You know what I mean? You like to see, you like to see a lot of trades in the offseason. And we're heading towards that in the NBA as well, where don't get too excited about any trades in the offseason. There may be some trades, and they might not even be as blockbuster as we think when you look back at them. One thing the NBA kind of did was take the fun out of transactions with all these tax aprons and restrictions and everything that kind of prevents teams from having repeats and dynasties. Salary caps and cap restrictions, they keep superstar players from teaming up without destroying all the depth on your team in order to put two superstars together, to where if you put two superstars together, it's almost like a lateral move. Like, if, going back to the NBA, a lot of talk about OKC, what they're going to do in the offseason. Should they trade for Giannis? I don't think Sam Presti can make a move, will make a move like that. I don't. He's a build through the draft, use your draft picks to get more talent, young talent, inexpensive talent. I don't see them trading for a contract like Giannis's, to where you're going to have to, first off, the Thunder are already over the tax apron with the team they have now. They're probably going to have to let Caruso or Hartenstein or some of those supporting parts walk. If you remember the prior episodes where I mentioned, the Nuggets, the Celtics, the Lakers, the Bucks, almost every team that won an NBA title went well over the cap or the tax apron and struggled to get better since winning the title. Couldn't add anything else, couldn't do anything but just get rid of players until, you kind of had to, you almost had to hit on a draft pick. You almost had to get a young talent that's inexpensive in order to sustain. This is why OKC, the Spurs look like the best teams in the league this past season, because they all, other than a few key additions and pickups, their core is drafted players. They're all on rookie salaries. You look at Boston, Tatum and Brown, there's not much you can put around them with their salaries the way they are. It's not sustainable. You're going to have to move one of them. And then even then, what you're going to get back to make the salaries line up is pretty much going to be a lateral move. Giannis goes to Milwaukee, you put him with him and Tatum, it's the same boat as Tatum and Brown. You're just hoping that Giannis is a little better than Brown or Tatum's, you're really, it's hard to really make moves like that. This is why a lot of teams are hesitant of making moves. And a lot of times these teams end up trading stars to like salary dump teams, like, Trey Young going to the Washington Wizards, Anthony Davis going to the Wizards, anywhere they got cap space at some point. Ja Morant hasn't been traded. Nobody's, taking on Ja's salary. Nobody's taking on Zion's salary. So, the NFL, the NFL's got a lot of booming offseason stuff like that because, they don't have that type of, they're a little tight now. The NBA is getting tighter, but it's a difference when you're moving superstar players around versus moving star players in the NFL. NFL is more team oriented and less superstar oriented than the NBA. So you see these type of trades more frequently these days in the NFL. Back in the NBA older days, as fans, we live for those big trades. Seeing a superstar go to LA or go to Miami or something like that. That shakes the basketball world. The world doesn't shake too much with an NBA trade anymore because there's so many cap restrictions. It's almost like if you're not building through the draft, those moves you're making are almost useless. But that's my time for the night. I'll be back Saturday, 2 days from now, 10 o'clock, discussing hip hop, the Saturday Night Live episode. You can find me on Instagram at This Is Left Fresh. You can find me on TikTok at This Is Left Fresh. I'll be back looking at how the schedule permits. I'll send out postings for whenever I can record around these NBA finals because these games right now are pretty much paramount at this point. It's about as critical as it gets. Getting towards the end of the season, going to have a lot of different discussions going on to keep things going. A lot of great sports discussions around, current events when there's less current events in the off season. Going to have a lot of different topics and everybody to chime in on. So y'all stay tapped in for that. That's my time for the night. Y'all have a great night. Y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you Saturday. It's the Left Fresh Podcast. I'm out. Peace.